Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining us. You are live with the World Economic Forum. I can't really say happy Anti-Corruption Day, but today is Anti-Corruption Day, and we're talking about corruption. This is an open conversation on corruption. People have told us they really care about corruption, so we want to have that conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. This is Shape the World. My name is Yemi Babington-Ashaye. I am the head of the Global Shapers community at the World Economic Forum. I'm also your host for Shape the World, a series of open conversations for people like you and me. People who care about the world beyond our everyday job. So thank you for dialing. Today we're talking about corruption and you drive the show. And we have a very special guest with us, Mr. Corruption, or Mr. Anti-Corruption himself, Cobus de Swardt. He's the head of Transparency International. We like love on the show, so if you can please say hello. Show them some love. All right, thank you so much. So, welcome. We're talking about anti-corruption. You drive the show. If you post questions in the feed, then we'll have a great show. Now, Cobus, I guess today's a really busy day for you. I guess anti-corruption day is a bit like your annual. It's a big day. So thank you so much for finding time to speak with us about this. Has it been a good day? It's kind of hard to say good day on anti-corruption, but has it been a good day?
No, I think you cannot say that any day is a good day in terms of anti-corruption. But has it been a good year for those that stand up against corruption? Yes, that has been the case, because all around the world we see ordinary people standing up and saying we've had enough of this corruption, we want to see change, and that is good news.
All right, fantastic. Showing love to all of you. Hello, Federico. Love the fact. Hi, Belle. You guys, we have some regulars here. If you're just joining, the way we do this, hi, Heather in Virginia. If you show me some love, we'll show you some love back. So you can say hello. Okay, what should we talk about? Today is Anti-Corruption Day, so I can't say Happy Anti-Corruption Day. How do you say that, by the way? Do you say Happy Anti-Corruption Day?
No.
So what do you say?
We say together against corruption.
Okay, so happy together against corruption. We're talking anti-corruption. What should we talk about? First of all, is there a standard definition for corruption?
Yes, there is, but that's
Hi, Mohammed.
That's that technical stuff of entrusted power and abuse of that. There's a very simple way to explain corruption. Corruption is when somebody has some power to make decisions and they abuse that, not for the benefit of others, for themselves. So a policeman or policewoman who has got power to make sure that traffic things work, they abuse that to fill money into their own pocket. So it's an abuse of power to benefit yourself.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. We have many more people who've just joined. This is Shape the World live with the World Economic Forum. We are live at the HQ of Transparency International. They exist to fight corruption. And today is an open conversation on corruption with the head of Transparency International, Cobus de Swardt. Thank you so much for finding time for us. Now, you drive the show. If you tell me hello, hi Mandler in Doha, I try to say hello back. But we need questions. So if this is an issue for you, post questions or comments in the feed and you drive the show. Now, while we wait for more questions, we have a poll on Twitter. And I really need you to please vote. Go to @WEF on Twitter. Do you believe that people are naturally corrupt? Yes, no, or power corrupt? Now, that's the cop-out. But anyway, please vote @WEF on Twitter. Share that poll and then come and talk to us about it right here. Okay, Federico, you get the first comment. Thank you. This year has been one of victory for anti-corruption in Latin America. Guatemala and Brazil deposed presidents who were in power because of corruption. How has technology aided the public in fighting corruption? What's your sense on this?
Well, firstly, let me agree in terms of what's happened in both Guatemala and Brazil is amazing. In Guatemala in particular, how people, ordinary people, prosecutors, civil society at large stood together. And yes, indeed, technology is helpful, but ultimately, technology can only help it if you've got a mass mobilization of people, and that Guatemala and Brazil has clearly shown.
Fantastic. Thank you. Short, sharp, and sweet. Hey, he's willing to talk about anything. So let's test him. Get us some tough questions. Lazaro wants to get tough. Thank you, Lazaro. Can you provide some examples of corruption? Is this a figment of people's imagination? Some examples. What's an example of corruption? You talked about the police officer. Any other examples?
Well, corruption happens at many different levels. It happens at the most local level. Let me give you an example. In Zimbabwe, women giving birth, every time they scream of pain, they have to pay $5 for the medical care.
Really?
That is at the low level. That
is low in every sense of the word.
And then you get at the very high level, grand corruption, where people skim off not only millions, but billions of state asset to fill their own coffer. So at different levels, a fiction of the imagination. Well, if you look at corruption, even conservative estimates is that it makes up between 2 to 5, maybe 7% of the overall GDP or income of a country, skimmed off by corruption.
Wow.
If we have economic growth rates of that, the world would be an amazing place. So this is not something that hurts a little bit. It hurts a lot of people very directly, and it hurts the poor most directly.
All right, fantastic. Thank you so much. We are live talking about anti-corruption on Anti-Corruption Day, and we're talking to Mr. Anti-Corruption, Cobus de Swardt, the head of Transparency International. Any question you have, he says he's going to take it. I think you just talked about corruption being so pervasive. Now, if it's such a big issue, you said something like what? How 7% in
could be of some
countries.
Economies.
Now, please, we have a poll at WEF on Twitter. Please vote. Do you believe that people are naturally corrupt? Yes, no, or power corrupt? Please vote on Twitter and come here and tell us why.
I would like to vote on that as well.
Okay, we'll come to you. Let's let the audience have a say. How is anybody there can tell me how we're doing on the poll? What's winning? I'd just love to know. What's winning the poll? All right, I just checking it out. Oh, it's a dead heat, people. You need to vote. If you have a strong view, at WEF on Twitter, do you believe that people are naturally corrupt? Vote now. All right.
I can see that result. I want to comment on it because I disagree with it.
It's okay. It's too early. We'll get to that. All right.
And I'm not Mr. Corruption or Mr. Anti-Corruption. The world has shown that it is ordinary people that stand up against corruption that brings about the change. And of that, we've seen millions doing it this year. Corruption is not to be fought by specialists. Corruption is particularly be fought by ordinary people that say we've had enough.
So everybody can say, I'm Mr. or Mrs. Anti-Corruption.
Yes, and we have a declaration against corruption of 5 very simple things that everybody can do.
Are you sure everybody can do it?
Yes, and people can sign up. You go to our website, you can sign up. It's a commitment that you won't pay bribes, that you won't ask for bribe, that you speak up against corruption. Very easy, that you work with others, and very importantly, that you won't vote for political candidates that don't show and demonstrate that they are transparent and work against corruption. 5 very simple things.
Amazing.
If the majority of people in the world were to do that, corruption would lie belly up very soon.
All right, so the 5 things were you won't pay bribes.
You won't ask bribes.
Ask for bribes.
You work with others.
You speak up, you work with others.
No, they're 2 separate things. You speak up when you see it. And fifthly, you vote. And you won't vote for political office, for candidates that don't demonstrate the transparency.
Fantastic. Can I see that card? Just, I think we all want to take a look. It looks.
Will you sign up?
I will sign up. That's a commitment.
You will sign up before you leave the office?
All right, done. You can see it. You got your snapshot. All right, check it out. And it's on your website. What's your website again?
Transparency.org.
Transparency.org. All right, fantastic. Thank you. All right, we are live talking about anti-corruption on Anti-Corruption Day. Lazaro, you have tough questions. Lazaro wants to know examples. You talked about everyday people who stood up for corruption. Are there examples where there's been a positive end, an issue has been solved? I guess you said it's been solved. I guess that means somebody's been convicted.
Well, let's take that in 2 ways.
Yes.
Earlier on, we had a very good example of what happened both in Brazil and Guatemala.
Yes.
Positive examples of change that happened. However, when we look around the world, what is one of the greatest problems that we have? That people continue to get away with it. And that's why there remains across the world an immense impunity for corruption. In other words, people can act with corruption and they get away. They don't get punished. They don't held accountable. And that is arguably today the single biggest problem, because people feel it is worth it to take the risk to be corrupt. Because even if you are caught, it is unlikely that you will really be punished with a punishment that fits the crime. There is still a notion that when you steal $5 from a shop, that you should face justice and maybe go to prison. But when you steal hundreds of millions from the public, then it's considered that's a a white collar crime. Let's not be so hard. It is a major problem that we still don't have the punishment that fits the crime when it comes to corruption.
Okay, now let's talk about that, because we asked 26,000 young people what the biggest challenge in their country is, and they voted for corruption. And so I think it was the number one answer in every world region. So I think young people agree this is a huge issue. Then we asked them, if the government wants to be more transparent, what should the government do? General question. And the response was visible penalties for people who exhibit corruption or poor governance. Now, you just talked about penalties. What kind of penalties would you like to see for corruption?
Well, let me take a step back. Your poll asking young people is similar to all our research. It's similar to what the BBC poll finds around the world, issue most talk about. It's the same when the United Nations looked at what are the biggest issue of our time, what came up as one of the top issues. This is truly an issue around the world that is uniting people. In terms of crimes that fit, punishment that fits the crime.
Yes, and you have to let them know. So what
do
you think?
So firstly, when you look at, let's start with one of the biggest problems in our economy worldwide, the financial sector. Financial sector and banks have engaged in money laundering, have facilitated corruption, have enabled people to take money through illicit flows, in other words, illegal flows of money from the poorest countries of the world into the richest countries of the world. And what have they suffered from that? They have suffered some fines. Some of them rather big fines, but what has those fines meant? Those fines meant nothing, that nobody in those companies went to jail. Nobody in those companies suffered and lost their jobs. And the banks just pay those fines and the business goes on. And it was just seen as a part of the cost of business. That's not enough. Furthermore, when you look at the crimes that have been committed against societies, where the wealth of societies have been stolen over the years, even when there's punishment, like we've seen with the banks, those punishment and those fines are paid to the rich countries in the world, to the US, to the UK, etc. And the poor people that have suffered are not benefiting from that. So the poor people suffer because their money has been stolen, their royal resources flow out, and even the fines that are paid, they don't benefit from. Somehow the system is not right.
No, this is not right, not fair, not just. Thank you so much for watching. This is Shape the World Live with the World Economic Forum. This is a conversation about anti-corruption, and you guys are on fire with these questions. Keep them coming. We're talking to Cobus de Swardt, the head of Transparency International. They live to fight corruption. Now, can I push you a little bit?
I like that.
I can push you. Okay. Now, on penalties, China gives the death penalty to people who are corrupt in government. Is that okay?
No, that is not okay.
So death penalty is too far?
No, death penalty, let's take a step back. When you fight corruption, this is essentially a fight for human rights, because it's about social justice in the world. And that's why clearly you cannot do that and then actually act in violation of basic human rights. We take the view that the death penalty is unsuitable, period.
All right, that's a strong view. We pushed him and he pushed back. Thank you very much.
And I've said that in China, sitting next to the Minister of Supervision. that punishment through capital punishment, through death penalty is unacceptable, period.
All right, strong. He's willing to take tough questions. Please get them in. All right, Agnes asked the question, and we want more questions, short and sharp. If you have them, send them in. Agnes asked a short and sharp question. What's the difference between corruption and fraud? Is there a difference?
Agnes, there is a difference. However, when you look at how complex it is, the same methods that are used to commit fraud are often also to use corruption. It's the same. When you look at tax issues, people say, well, tax evasion is not the same as corruption. But often they are so closely linked.
Yes.
And when you look at tax evasion, that's a theft from the public purse. It is people enriching themselves instead of sharing that with their fellow citizens. And that is a form of corruption. And one should have no doubt that when you look at the close linkages between fraud and corruption, it is often very difficult to separate them. And the ways to fight them is the same. We need to have much more openness. We have to do away with this anti-social secrecy. When you look at, for example, the Panama Papers,
Yes.
it was actually most of that was those that are wealthy, those that are influential, stealing from their own populations in secrecy of rules that exactly those same establishments set themselves. Unacceptable.
All right, fantastic. Thank you. I hope you voted at WEF on Twitter. If you just joined, we're asking, do you believe that people are naturally corrupt? Yes, no, or power corrupt? Vote and tell us why. We have so many questions to get through. Let's keep on fire. Nuruddin wants to know, to your point about the Panama Papers, why are some cities like London heavens for corrupt money?
That is not a difficult question to answer, but a very important one. Indeed, a few months ago, there was a big anti-corruption summit in London. We went there and said, it is great that the UK government is doing so much to bring people together to make commitments against corruption. Charity starts at home. And the first thing we want also the UK government to do is to have much greater transparency and openness to look at what goes on, for example, in the property market in London. Because when people steal money through corruption from poor countries, they want to invest it where the investment will continue to have a lot of value.
Yes.
That makes it very attractive to invest in, for example, property in the United Kingdom. And in London, there are parts where the majority of those properties are held by people where the real owners are not known. Secrecy.
Yes.
That has to be addressed. And indeed, without doing it, we can never, ever say that corruption is a problem in the South. Corruption is a global problem, and the beneficiaries from corruption are often sitting in the wealthy countries. It's often those in cities like London, but it's also citizens that live in wealthy countries in Europe, because their pension funds, all of that, are actually often the beneficiaries of their economies. And as long as this skewed balance remains that corruption benefits the wealthy and particularly penalizes the poor, our world will not be able to deal with one of the major issues of our time, namely inequality.
All right, fantastic. And actually, if you check out shapersurvey.org, young people told us exactly the same thing. We asked them, what's driving inequality in your country?
I look older than what I am.
Oh, yeah, he's definitely young. You can feel the energy. We asked what's driving inequality in your country, and they said the number one answer was corruption.
Yes, absolutely.
So absolutely the same thing. Check out shapersurvey.org. Now, everybody wants a diagnosis from Dr. Anti-Corruption here. Rodolfo wants to know, what do you think about corruption in Honduras? If you want the diagnosis from the doctor, you can drop in the name of your country and he'll give you a response. So let's kick off with Honduras. Rodolfo, what do you think about corruption in Honduras?
Let me say two things about Honduras. Is corruption one of the most serious problems facing Honduras? Absolutely yes. Do we have some of the bravest people fighting corruption in Honduras? Absolutely yes. Our own people, as well as many other activists, are putting their lives on the line to fight corruption in Honduras, because they say, in the same way that one often have to stand up and say, whether it is against, in my own country, South Africa, against apartheid, in Honduras, it is corruption. And there I just have immense respect for the activists that are willing to put their own well-being and their own lives on the line to fight corruption. How do they do that? They do that by actually challenging both the state and other economic institutions continuously to have dramatically more transparency and openness.
All right, Doctor, you got so many patients waiting, so we need to go through more questions. Heather, you get the next question. It's kind of gone up right now. Heather wants to know, we're really concerned about our President-elect Donald Trump and conflicts of interest. What can we do to protect against potential corruption in his administration? He takes all the tough questions, people. If you love what you're watching, share it. All right, hit that share button. Let's get some more love on the feed. All right, Doctor.
Heather, so clearly it goes without saying that if you look at the last year's election, that there were many things that when you look at our declaration, only voting for candidates that demonstrate that they are against corruption, that would be a concern to us. The fact that you have a presidential candidate who didn't put his tax return into the public domain, when we are actually saying that whoever is in public office should have public asset and income and interest declarations. This is indeed a major challenge. And that's why are we as an anti-corruption movement, and particularly the USA, very challenged at the moment? Yes. Are we particularly also challenged because not only in the US, but in countries around the world, there's an attack on civil liberties that enables ordinary people to participate, that enables journalists to report on stories. Have we seen the various waves of populism attacking those? Yes. So in many ways, we today, through technology, through many other areas, ordinary people having much more a voice against corruption, but we have new forms of suppression of civil society and of ordinary people. And that, I think, is also a challenge for the US and for citizens of the US, how to actually deal with this, because surely it is not only about a new administration. It's actually about a broader suppression of civil liberties that we see not only in the US, but also much wider.
All right, Doctor. All right, I'm going to have to apologize. Doctor is going to give some yes-no answers right now. All right, the next question is actually again just gone up. Someone wanted to know the Premier Netanyahu, he uses a fancy private jet. Is that an example of corruption? Yes or no only?
No.
No, good.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily. All right, let's move on. Another yes or no question. Someone wants to know about the anti-corruption campaign in China of President Xi. Wants to know, is this anti-corruption campaign just a gimmick or is it sincere? Yes or no only?
Yes, but.
Okay, yes, but. Thank you very much. We'll get some more expanded answers coming up shortly. Maybe like this one. Sumpis. All right, we can expand beyond yes or no. Thank you for cooperating. What is the main reason that people are corrupt?
Because there's the opportunity and there's a lack of transparency and openness. People don't necessarily, or now I'm answering the question whether they're essentially corrupt, I should stay away.
No, so he'll come back to this.
Yes.
All right. Mahmoud wants to know about South Korea. The doctor's diagnosis on South Korea and corruption. Didn't they just impeach the president?
Yes, the parliament decided that a few hours ago. And clearly, when you look at the issues at heart there, you have to say that in terms of dealing with conflict of interest, of dealing with personal enrichment, surely there one has to take your hat off for the South Korean people that over the last several weeks said, we will not tolerate that. Yes. And of course, one needs to add to that what is important, and this is where particularly organized civil society is very important. Once you've got actions like that, we've seen that with the Arab Spring as well, it's important that we just don't replace one president with another, but that we actually put in place the mechanisms and the policies that will ensure that this kind of thing cannot happen. And this is a huge challenge because often it is just you replace one president with another.
We have to change the system.
We have to change the system as well.
All right, I want to say thank you all. We still have more time. Don't go anywhere, but your questions are just amazing. So let's keep going. For those who just joined, it's an open conversation on anti-corruption, and you drive the show, so post your comments in the feed. All right, we want a diagnosis on Africa. Now, how much time do you have, Martin? Martin wants to know about Africa. This man can talk to you till next year about Africa, but can you give us a short, what's your diagnosis on anti-corruption in Africa, or corruption in Africa, actually? And then the next question is waiting.
Good. 3 very short things. Do we see progress in the fight against corruption in Africa? Yes.
Okay.
Do I still think that corruption is the single biggest thing that harms economic progress and a just distribution of resources in Africa? Yes.
Okay.
Thirdly, where are the biggest concerns? The biggest concerns doesn't sit in Africa. Yes, Africans have a big part to play, but the biggest concerns is that you still have an economic and a system, financial system, that enables immense amount of Africa's wealth to leave the continent on a daily basis. Let me be more specific. The amount of resources that Africa loses through illicit flows, illegal flows, through money laundering, through corruption, on a daily basis, is leading to a stripping of the wealth of Africa on a scale bigger than what we saw during slavery. It is absolutely unacceptable, and the beneficiaries of those sit in the wealthy countries around the world. So when we look at the terrible history Africa's gone through slavery, today that continues to be a stripping of the wealth of Africa, and that's why Africans have to take responsibility, but the international system, surely, and particularly when you think we've had the economic financial crisis in 2009, up until today, very little has changed to protect the wealth of Africa.
You've just depressed me. I think you've depressed lots of people, although they're giving you hearts, but lots of people are angry. That's so depressing.
No, it's not. It's not. Because you need to first understand the problem, what the problem is that you confront, because often people try to talk it away.
Yes.
No, the problem is real. And furthermore, there's very good news. If there is the political will, you can actually deal with illegal financial flows relatively easy, because this is not bags of money that go. This is actually electronic transactions.
Okay.
And they end up in banks' accounts in the wealthy countries in the world.
Okay.
You cannot control that dramatically more than what is
we
done at the
will
moment.
not go quietly into the night. All right. So yes, we're depressed, but we will stand up and fight. All right. So thank you very much, Vikrant. On that point you just made, Vikrant, you get the next question. Can technology play any role in the fight against corruption? What are your thoughts on that? You just talked about electronic transfers.
Of course, technology will, in the next 5 to 10 years, arguably play a major role in the fight against corruption, because it enables us to get a much more direct accountability.
Okay.
Through technology, you can have people participating. You can actually, for example, when you look at contracts that government enter for public construction,
yes.
When you have those much more online, where people can see who bids, they can see who owns the companies that are bidding, their technology can play a major part. And for activists such as us, the whole realm of social activism through digital means is arguably the one that in the next 5 to 10 years will play a major part in our work.
Oh, you made us smile again. Thank you. All right, something hopeful. We have a great question from Mark.
It's also because governments cannot control new ICTs in the way that they would like to, and how they could have controlled activism in the past.
All right, we have a great question from Mark Jones. He'd like to know, do people often try to bribe Transparency International to get a better anti-corruption ranking in your index?
Well, I think that would take I have not experienced that. I don't know of anybody, but I surely know that governments and others try to put immense pressure on us and try to be sometimes, let's say, not so nice, and sometimes even rather nasty, because they are unhappy about their ranking. But bribes themselves, no, haven't seen those.
Okay. There's so many questions, so I'm going to have to restrict the doctor again, but not to yes, no. You can add a little few more words. Okay,
He's really trying to control me like I'm a racing horse. Now a bit slower, a bit faster.
So many people want a piece of you, doctor. So I just want.
If you call me doctor, I'll take your tie off.
And I'll take yours off. Oh, but let's not do that. All right, Aram Azat would like to know, the perception of corruption. What can we do if there's good news? What can we do to help people see that there's good news? Because Ramsat says he's worried that even if governments are changing, it may be too slow for people to see that they're changing. What can we do to make the change more visible? And this is one of those restricted questions. So,
a change in policies or laws are basically useless if they are not backed up by behaving differently. So if a government puts a new law in place to protect whistleblowers,
yes,
but people don't see those whistleblowers being more protected, the law is worthless, and it will not add the perception that corruption remains a major negative
All right,
force.
so I'm going to ask you some questions related to what you just said, and I want to restrict you to yes, no, if it's okay. You can expand if you're really nice. So whistleblowers. A whistleblower is good, yes or no?
Yes, good.
WikiLeaks. Do you support WikiLeaks? Yes or no?
The essence.
Oh, he's struggling. Oh, I got him. All right.
The essence is good.
Okay, all right, fine. He got away with that. Let's talk about Snowden. Hero or traitor? Edward Snowden.
Definitely not a traitor. You cannot blame a messenger. What Snowden exposed was real problems in terms of how we deal with protecting the public good and what is in the public interest. And when we say that power is something that needs to be balanced with checks and balances, you cannot have systems that operate that are above basic checks and balances. That is what Snowden exposed. And for that, he cannot be, in my view, be a traitor.
Oh, wow. All right. Really powerful. Thank you. Okay. I pushed him and he's always had a comeback. So I rely on you. If you love what you're watching, please hit the share button and post some comments or questions. I need tough questions for Cobus de Swardt, the head of Transparency International. He's answering every question so far. Thank you so much. Jason wants you to comment on the Philippines. What do you think about the anti-corruption strategies in the Philippines? You can do a beyond yes, no on this one.
We've seen a few years ago some positive movements there. However, in terms of the particular strategies that are being followed at the moment, if you ask my opinion, it is much more in terms of what we communicate publicly and very little in terms of real changes in the fundamental ways in which both governments and businesses are operating in the Philippines.
He's holding no punches, man. Wow. Okay. Adi wants to know diagnosis on Pakistan. Adi, how much time do you have?
That is a difficult one. I think that, yes, there are some good news in terms of, in Pakistan, for example, what work that our own chapter does, looking at transparency on aid flows in, how that money is spent. So, yes, some positive news there. But in Pakistan, often the fight against corruption is seen as secondary to other national interest issues of security. And that means that there remains a fairly high degree of secrecy because it is seen in the national interest. And in that sense, do I think that we are winning the battle against corruption in Pakistan? No.
Okay. I guess if you talk about Pakistan, Kushagra would like to know about India.
Well, India is there, has a different dynamic, because what you've seen in India in the last 5-7 years is a very strong uprising from ordinary people, not only against corruption, but also in terms of right to information law, that is quite a progressive one, that has been used to create a greater transparency. So in India, you indeed see this groundswell coming up in terms of pushing issues further. And that's why I would be a little bit more optimistic that you are seeing more movement in India than a few years ago. Whether this movement will be enough to tip this to a point of no return would be very difficult, because the negative on India is that you have a very strong clampdown on civil society and civil liberties. And that, I think, if that continues, the fight against corruption will lose momentum in India, and that is a major concern as we speak.
All right, pulling no punches. And you guys are amazing. Look at these questions. I love it. Really tough questions, but he's got the response each time. Federico wants to know, and he said yes or no, not me. So Federico said yes or no, luxury trips to FIFA officials sponsored by Qatar before the drawing of the World Cup. Is this corruption, yes or no?
Yes, probably.
All right, we got a swift answer on that one. Let's go. Iris wants to know, how can corruption by dictators be kept in check? And Iris also mentions corruption by supranational bodies.
Okay. When you look at dictators, corruption is just one of the crimes that they commit. And that's why to keep dictators in check is the bigger overall thing. And there you need to look at what the international community has to take on as their responsibility in terms of how you deal with dictators. But that would include that you would have to restrict and make it as difficult as possible, for example, to take their stolen wealth that they have stolen from a country and deposit it in banks, whether that is in the UK or other countries. So the international community can do those things, but dictators use corruption and corrupt means, but the dictatorship itself is not necessarily to be just dealt with in the same way that you would deal with corruption of an international company.
Okay, this one, again, Aramazat is persistent, so this is a yes-no, small expand if you need to. He desperately wants you to speak to, is greed and the desire for abundance, is this the root of corruption?
No, but it plays a part.
Okay, thank you. All right. Hector wants to know, so corruption in the third world should be an international concern? I'm not sure where Hector got that from, but what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I come from a country that is so-called third world. I don't believe that there is something as a first world and a third world. There's one world. And that is also true for corruption. Corruption is not something that flourishes somewhere because some people are more corrupt than others. Corruption is a global problem, and that's why when anybody says that this is a problem in the so-called South or so-called North, no. It is a global problem, and corruption cannot flourish in any single country without it being able to move around and for its proceeds to go elsewhere.
All right, if you more people want the doctor's diagnosis, we're going to have to let the doctor go soon. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I am so sorry. All right.
The professor here will soon be in trouble.
All right. Agnes is asking for Indonesia. So what are your thoughts on Indonesia and the corruption fight in Indonesia?
Yeah, we've seen some positive moves in terms of a president putting also more resources in the fight against corruption in Indonesia. But are those sufficient? Are they particularly in balance with the major challenges facing the Indonesian economy?
Yes.
No, I think it is still way under-resourced. But yes, some positive moves by the president and the government and an indication that there's a greater political will. But in terms of the nature of the economy and the way that it operates, in my view, far too little.
All right, fantastic. Friends, before we let the doctor go, he's so sorry. He's handled all the so-called difficult questions. And sometimes it works to just switch it a little bit. So we're going to switch it a little bit.
You're now setting a trap for me.
Let's just see how you handle this phase. This is the final phase of the conversation.
I still want to comment on the
poll. Don't worry, we're going to do that at the end.
Yeah, if I can't comment on the poll, I won't speak to you again.
I'll be locked in, right? So if you don't see me, call the police. I'm in Berlin at the HQ of Transparency International.
I will take him home with me and I have to eat my food.
So let's get some personal questions. Do you have any personal questions for Cobus de Swardt? He's African, South African. He's the head of Transparency International. And let's try him with some personal questions. Let's get to know him a bit better. We'll do a few minutes of this, then we have to let him go. So if you have any personal questions, please post them. This is Shape the World. If you just joined live with the World Economic Forum on Anti-Corruption Day, we have an open conversation on corruption with Cobus de Swardt, the head of Transparency International. We've been talking about corruption. We'll go back to it to wrap up. But right now, we're taking personal questions. So if you have any personal questions, please post them in. Can I get the latest Twitter poll? Can I please get the latest Twitter poll? If you haven't voted, we have a poll on Twitter, @WEF. Please vote. Do you believe that people are naturally corrupt? Yes, no, or power corrupts? Oh my God, it's such a dead heat. It's such a dead heat. Okay, now, I think while we wait for personal questions, do you want to comment on this?
Yeah, so I can tell you the result. The result is 30% says yes, 34% says no, and 36% says it's power that corrupts. I disagree.
All right, let's
I believe that the answer is no. People are not essentially corrupt.
Oh, this is interesting.
Are people essentially racist? No. Are people essentially criminal? No. I absolutely passionately believe that people are essentially good. And at the same time, when there's opportunities to steal and you think you won't be caught out and you won't pay the price and you can just pocket the $5, would many people take up that opportunity if they believe they can get away with it? Yes, they would. Does that mean that they are essentially corrupt? No. It does mean that if you take away the normal social controls, and corruption, unfortunately, for a very long time, was seen as a crime that didn't really matter. It didn't really have victims. You don't have to feel bad about it. It's just a few dollars that you put in your own pocket, or if it is millions, you take it from a company that can afford it and people don't suffer. But it's not that people essentially look for it. I believe that people essentially would rather live in a country or in a community where there is enough checks and balances and enough transparency that both wanting to pocket that for your own benefit, but also when people do it, that they will be punished. That is much rather. So I think that people are not born to be corrupt. In the same way, I was not born to fight corruption. I fight corruption because I can see how it undermines social justice and human rights across the world.
Okay. Thank you so much. That's so powerful. That is so powerful. Thank you. Thank you so much. Before we let him go, I do want him to answer some difficult personal questions. So please ask some personal questions. Now, I think on that note, I want to ask you, why did you start fighting corruption? Where did this come from for you? Was there a moment? Was it a job? How did you get into anti-corruption in such a professional way?
Well, as a young teenager in South Africa, I was confronted with particularly the very brutal forms of racism that you have in South Africa, and a system that undermined human rights, that killed and destroyed people. And I was a beneficiary of that. I was a so-called white person in a very racist society where whites disproportionately benefited. And I believed that if I don't say no to that, I could not be free myself.
Oh, wow.
And that same drive in understanding a South African political system that was so corrupt, and looking at how corruption, as we have greased the wheels of human rights abuses through the centuries, that brought me to corruption because of the way that it undermines social justice. And that's why, for me, it was another form of human rights abuse. And that's why I fight corruption, because I believe that we can live in a much fairer and a much more equal world, and we can actually have much better social justice and basic human services to people if we can deal with corruption. And once that happens, I think we will all be better off.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Can I ask you again in the personal vein, what does freedom mean to you?
Well,
I'll try to catch him out. Let's see if he can.
No, I think that freedom for me has three parts. Firstly, that you are treated the same and equally.
Okay.
And there again, looking at my own country, I grew up in a system where people were treated so differently based whether they were white or black or they were men or women or whatever. So fair treatment, equal treatment. I think that's an element of freedom. Secondly, that all people have an equal right to speak out,
Yes.
and participate equally in the social institutions of the countries or the cities where they live in. And there again, we can continue to see how we live in a very divided world.
Yes.
So that kind of economic freedom. And thirdly, that all people have the same ability to actually shape their life, in other words, equal opportunities. Exactly. And those equal opportunities indeed have to be balanced. Because if you, in a country such as my own, where opportunities have been so unequally, you have to look at now, how do you make people that suffered for generations benefit from the fruits of their labor? And unfortunately, inequality in the way that it continues across the world is also undermining freedom. So I don't think freedom is a kind of an abstract term. I think freedom is something very practical, where people say, I can live with dignity because I'm considered an equal human being. I can make choices and participate equally, and I will benefit proportionally in a fair way from the riches of my country. And if you look across the world, with the rise of populism, you see many people that live in well-established democracies not feeling free, because they don't see equal opportunities and fairness being applied.
All right, thank you so much. You get the last word to close us out. So I'll let you give us the last word, but I want to thank everybody out there. This has been amazing. I mean, who said you cannot trust people to run a conversation? Your questions have been so powerful. I feel like I've learned so much on Anti-Corruption Day. I feel like I am now Mr. Anti-Corruption because I've got things I know I can do. I hope you feel the same way. But before we leave, Cobus de Swardt, thank you so much. I want you to give us some final thoughts, just to help us wrap up. What are some final thoughts you would share on Anti-Corruption Day?
Well, from my side, thank you very much. It's a great privilege to have spoken to you. It surely gives me energy for the fight forward. For that, I'm very grateful. And maybe just to close off, our declaration against corruption, 5 simple things. And I think that is both my plea to you, is to say, you don't need organizations such as TI. Yes. You don't need to necessarily always be part of a particular movement. But in your daily life, everybody can make a difference. Nobody can do it alone, but standing together, everybody can make a difference. Please go and check out our website, and our declaration, 47 words, can change the world. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. And I've committed, I'm going to sign myself. Please do join and be part of the movement. Thank you so much. If you're watching this after the broadcast, as you can see, we can all shape the world. Please post your comments in the feed. We all read it. It influences everybody. And this way, together, we continue to shape the world. Thank you so much. Have a great, what was it called? Together Against Corruption Day. Thank you.
Thank you very much.